research, that's an opportunity. But there's also an opportunity now because of Zoom to be able to participate with those virtually. So if you'd like to be on the list to learn about when we have our brown bags or when we have our distinguished lecturer talks, the email is right up there. Just send us an email to crimsey@stsu.edu and we'll get you on the list so that you can find out when things are happening. Today, we're very excited to have a distinguished lecturer, but I don't get to do the introduction for that piece. But I do want to just take a minute to introduce, we have two deans who are going to do a quick welcome, and I'm going to introduce the first, and that's my dean, Dr. Chung. Come on up. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Barry Chung, Dean of the College Education. Welcome everyone to the 2022 Crimsey Distinguished Lecture Series. I don't know if you know that our university is celebrating 125th anniversary. Do you know that? Wonderful. And since the college education actually started with SDSU, so we are also celebrating our 125th anniversary as a college education. And you should know that Crimsey is also in its 36th year. And I think that could be older than some students, participating in this lecture. So as Donna mentioned, this lecture and Crimsey are sponsored by two colleges, Education and Sciences. And I'm very proud of this center. I often say that Crimsey is like the model center that I would dream to have for my college. Why? Because it's interdisciplinary. They're very active. They're getting a lot of research money, like from my record, it's $25 million of research money, bringing in multidisciplinary work, supporting faculty from both colleges, engaging in mathematics and science education. And one last thing I want to mention is that when I was in high school, I had two strongest subject matters. One is mathematics, the other is biology. Unfortunately, I'm not doing anything related to these two disciplines. My discipline is psychology, but I'm using a lot of work that I learned from these disciplines in my work. So I want to ask Dr. Dean Roberts to come to the stage to give his remarks too.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Donna. I'm Jeff Roberts, Dean of the College of Sciences here at San Diego State. I am so pleased to be here this afternoon and so excited to have the opportunity to welcome Dr. Marta Civil, Crimsey's 2022 Distinguished Lecturer to campus. Dr. Civil, we're so honored that you're visiting us. Crimsey is absolutely indispensable to our university's efforts to facilitate and support research in mathematics and science education. And as Barry's explained, it really is one of SDSU's crown jewels in effective cross-disciplinary collaboration between two colleges, sciences and education. And I'll brag a little bit about the College of Sciences right now. So much going on. I am so proud, and I know many of you in this room are aware of the efforts we've made over the last couple of years to really expand our disciplinary footprint across the college in mathematics and sciences education, having hired our first biology education faculty member and our first computer science education faculty member, Gina Spaglia and Miranda Parker, who will begin this fall. And I'm pretty confident that we'll be doing more such faculty hiring in the next few years. I also want to point out how important centers like Crimsey are to our university's strategic plan. We talk, Dr. Civil, a lot amongst ourselves about our R1 aspirations that are articulated in that plan, but we don't talk enough about how that particular goal is situated under a broader umbrella that we are and will forever be a special kind of Hispanic serving institution with a particular commitment to public-facing scholarship and a deep awareness of our identity as a border institution. And for those reasons in particular, the subject of your lecture today is so appropriate and so resonant. So I have appreciated the opportunity to say a few words this afternoon. I won't be able to stay for the entire lecture, but thank you, Dr. Civil, for traveling to San Diego to present this lecture today. And thank you to all of you for working so hard to ensure that all kids are well served in our efforts to teach mathematics and science. What a calling. Enjoy the lecture and thank you.
Okay, well, I think I'm the last speaker before the person you came to see, so I'll be brief or not so. I'm Bill Zahner. I'm the director of the Center for Research in Math and Science Education and a faculty member in the math department, and I'm excited to see everyone here today. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Marta Seville as the Center for Research in Mathematics and Science Education's 2022 Distinguished Lecturer. Dr. Seville is and I had to read off all of these titles because it's impressive, Roy F. Grasser Chair of Mathematics at the University of Arizona, also the professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning and Sociocultural Studies, a distinguished professor of university outreach, the associate head of entry-level instruction, and a member of the graduate faculty at the University of Arizona. So a scholar of many titles. Dr. Seville's research broadly focuses on equity in mathematics education and teacher education for prospective mathematics teachers. One strand of this work, which Dr. Seville will be talking about this afternoon, is incorporating a funds of knowledge approach in mathematics education. The research on funds of knowledge started as an anti-deficit framework to counter the pervasive assumptions about historically excluded and minoritized students in schools, that is, Black students, Latinx students, recent immigrants, and students designated as English learners, and so on. Funds of knowledge grew from anthropological and ethnographic research, whereby educators visited with families to come to understand the wealth of resources and capital that families have. And one of Seville's innovations was taking this work, which was primarily situated in language and literacy education, and bringing that to mathematics education. Marta's work has been recognized through numerous awards and accolades. I'll just name a few. She received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the Distinguished Outreach Professor at the University of Arizona, and the Iris Carl Leadership and Equity Award from Todos Mathematics for All. Dr. Seville is a national and international leader in the field of mathematics education. She has served in leadership roles for the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, Todos Mathematics for All, and the Association of Mathematics Teacher Educators, an organization that has deep roots and connections here to San Diego State. Currently, she is a member at large, the USA representative, on the International Commission on Mathematics Instruction, which I believe is pronounced ICMAI, for those who are tracking, the worldwide organization developed to the research and development in mathematics education. And she's also a committee member on the National Academies of Sciences Consensus Report on Equity in PK-12 STEM Education. Marta is a prolific writer and collaborator. She has edited 11 books and proceedings, some of which present company may have published a couple chapters in. She's authored and co-authored too many articles for me to count, including book chapters, articles, and conference proceedings. She's also led a number of funded grants, including several large grants from the National Science Foundation, and I'll say a bit more in just one moment on one of those. At present, Marta is the PI of a grant with colleagues from the University of Maryland and the University of Missouri called Collaborative Research, Parents, Teachers, and Multilingual Children Collaborating on Mathematics Together. And finally, I can say that Dr. Seville is a trusted colleague and mentor to me personally. When I was a graduate student at UC Santa Cruz, Marta was the principal investigator of an NSF-funded Center for Research and Center for Learning and Teaching, called CEMELA, the Center for the Mathematics Education of Latinos and Latinas. As a graduate fellow, I received funding from the center to pursue my doctoral studies in mathematics education. So literally, I wouldn't be here today without Dr. Seville. We were also mentored into the field by a wealth of mathematics educators, and I'm probably going to forget a few names, but among the co-PIs was Rick Kitchen, Rebecca McGraw, Rico Gutstein, Lana Kisti, Arya Razfar, Sylvia Celedon Petichis, Kip Tejas, Eddie Mosqueda, Julia Aguirre, Judith Moscovich, and Marta Seville, and Ginny Horick, I think I forgot, so I need to add Ginny. And from observing and working closely with these PIs, I learned so much more than just mathematics education. I learned how to manage a project, and how to lead others, and how to work with doctoral students and with undergraduates and master's students in a humanizing way, and to conduct research that engages and works with the community. So I am so deeply grateful for this opportunity to welcome this evening Dr. Marta Seville for the 2022 Crimsey Distinguished Lecture. Thank you.
Well, Bill pretty much summarized everything that I've done, so time to go home. Hopefully I'll have something to share. Thank you so much for the invitation to give this lecture, and thank you so much. Yeah, you're right, there's an echo, I have to, I don't know. Thank you so much, Bill, for this very nice introduction. And it's great to see both deans. It doesn't happen very often to get both deans of science and education in the same room, listening to a lecture, so thank you for your presence here. Donna, thank you for your kind words. All right, so let's start it here. All right, so I'm going to give you an overview of work that I've been doing for many years now. Some of these hopefully will be new to some of you, and some of it I know that some of you have seen. But I'm hoping that I gave it a bit of a different twist. And in fact, the twist is as follows. I want to start with what led me to the work I do. But I'm going to ask you to start with that. So I'm going to, the first slide is going to come actually, is a question for you. And then I talk about the funds of knowledge. And then I'll talk about the learning from and with parents. There is a progression here. And I will address a little bit of the current work, which is the project that Bill alluded now at the end with University of Maryland and University of Missouri, and some implications. So I want you to take, a few seconds to think about what leads you or what led you to the work you do. So if you are a grad student or you're a PhD student, what is your passion? Why do you want to do what you're doing? And if you are beyond the PhD, what led you? Why do you do what you do? Because for me, this is a very important question that I ask myself, and this is what gets me going. So I'll give you, and if you want to share with the person next to you, that's fine, but this is the only interactive part in the lecture. Don't worry, I'm not going to be going back and forth, because otherwise, but I just wanted to give you, put you in that frame of mind. All right, so hopefully you'll keep that question in mind now and as you, go in your different trajectories. For me, it was when I was a grad student at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and I was teaching content courses for pre-service elementary teachers. I didn't have any intention when I first came to the University of Illinois to go into mathematics education. I was actually interested in artificial intelligence and mathematical logic and issues of language. But I started teaching these courses. And I noticed that students who tried to make sense of the problems based on real life experiences felt more insecure in their knowledge and wanted to use algebra, for example, as the proper way to do math. Yet, in my opinion, they were actually the ones whose reasonings made the most sense, but they were not necessarily the proper way, and I'm using proper, of course, in quotes, right? So while my original interest was more on the cognitive side and focusing on pre-service teachers' understanding and beliefs about mathematics, this idea of the role of everyday context, caught my attention and led me to the notions of situated cognition, ethnomathematics, and more broadly, that led me to equity considerations. And that is still what drives me. So I started from a very cognitive, trying to understand how pre-service teachers understood mathematics and their beliefs, but I started branching out into different things. So let me share an example. In content courses for pre-service teachers, we often look at different algorithms for arithmetic operations. And at the cognitive level, what we want is how do they make sense of the different algorithms? Do they know why they work? For example, the equal addition for subtraction, which is how I was taught to subtract, and I still subtract to this day, which is different from the regrouping that is traditionally taught here in the US. But also from a beliefs point of view, how may that influence their teaching, right? Do they have a belief that there is one proper way of doing things and the other maybe is not so proper, or, So here is a quote from pre-service teachers. I do believe that you could eventually convince him that learning to carry is easier and leaves less room for error. So this is when I presented them with an alternative, so-called alternative algorithm that was different from the one that usually students learn in this country. So the pre-service teacher is saying, yes, but you could eventually convince him that learning to carry is easier. It's easier because that's the way you learn it. That might not be easier for the student who learn it in a different way. And there leaves less room for error. Again, it depends. I mean, I subtract using equal addition, and I don't think I make any more mistakes than someone who's using regrouping. And in fact, I need to think when I'm doing the regrouping, and I need to think less when I'm doing the equal addition, because that's how I was taught. And here's another one. From left to right, so this algorithm that you will start from left to right, wouldn't kids get confused? If I show them from left to right, I would think that when you go to the real thing, that they would get upset or would get confused. So again, what is the real thing? The real thing is how we were taught, and the other things are not so real. So this leads me to ask, how do we handle difference? We get students who bring different ways of doing things. What happens when they bring these different algorithms, or more generally, different approaches to doing mathematics, or to doing anything, but obviously here we're focusing on mathematics, right? So to doing science or to doing other, in other content areas. What role does valorization of knowledge play? And now we're getting more into, of course, what are the implications when students are low-income immigrant children? So the questions changed for me. I started very cognitive, beliefs, pre-service teachers, content, and I became more interested in whose knowledge and ideas get recognized, who gets to participate in the classroom, whose approaches are celebrated, which forms of participation or communication, for example, different languages, are encouraged. And so in this article, I have a framework for participation that covers some of these questions in more detail. So what led me to the work I do? These experiences with pre-service elementary teachers led me to an interest in the unheard, unseen, unlistened, made up that word, to students in the classroom. In my K-12 local context, that led me to Mexican origin students and their families, and to the Fonts of Knowledge project. So I was lucky enough that shortly after arriving to Arizona, I was able to find out about the Fonts of Knowledge project, and I got totally hooked into that. And as Bill said, at the time they were doing mostly issues of biliteracy and bilingual classes and language and literacy, and not so much explorations with mathematics. So for about 30 years now, I've been doing work in mathematics education in Mexican-American low-income communities in Tucson. I have to say, and of course, the same thing as here in San Diego, there are wide differences in these communities. Some are recent immigrants, some are here for generations. You look at the geography and the history, Arizona, parts of Arizona were part of Mexico. So, we didn't cross the border, they didn't cross the border crossed them. Okay. Some are Spanish only, some are English only, and some are bilingual, or multilingual in some cases. And our approach is grounded on a rejection of a deficit model approach towards their education, to which Bill alluded earlier. Instead, our work is grounded on a sociocultural paradigm. And this is one of the definitions of Fonts of Knowledge. They are all similar, so I just, it's the idea, you can read the definition, but it's the idea that communities, any community, any household, they have resources, they have knowledge, they have experiences that allow them to get ahead and to thrive. And our role as educators is to really try to learn from the strengths that families and students bring to the classroom. So the model of funds of knowledge that I was engaged into consists of the teachers get some ethnographic, solid preparation to conduct ethnographic household visits with an anthropologist Norma Gonzalez at the time. And then we discuss these ethnographic household visits in teacher study groups. And from there, modules are developed and implemented in the classroom implementation. Because that's, in a nutshell, what the project was when I got involved. So in more detail, the ethnographic household visits, the importance here is that the teachers go there to learn. Okay, they don't go there to tell the families something about your child is doing this or your child. They go there to learn from the families. And the questionnaires are very much in depth and they range over these topics that I have here, family structure, labor history, household activities. We added the mathematics when I joined, a few more questions about mathematics when I joined the project. Parental attitude, parenting, money, religion, education, language should be there actually, ethnic identity. There's a section on language for sure. So as I said, teachers are often surprised at how welcome they felt into the home, going to the home, and how much they learn. They often report developing a stronger rapport with the student whose family they visited. They might only visit one family several times. They might visit 2 or 3 families. It's very labor intensive. It's not so much that you want to learn from all the families, because you cannot really do it, or some teachers loop with the students and they did home visits with all the students. But it's more that, you want to get that experience of breaking down a possible deficit view that you may have of these communities. I'm not saying that you necessarily have it, but let's look at these teachers' reflections and that might give you an idea. So for example, this teacher says, based on the one home visit, I know what the student does in her family and what the family does. It makes me more sensitive to asking questions that I know she knows the answers to. It is great she's now participating more in class. And the second one is alluding to this deficit that I guess realizing that the home is a real learning place, real learning environment. I didn't think it was so much a learning environment as it is. So even if you make that little, which is huge, difference, you start planting the seeds. This is a long quote. It's from a chapter in the Funds of Knowledge book. So Martha Floyd Tenery was one of the teachers in the project. And when the project was ending, this book came out a few years later. And really, if you haven't read the book, I certainly recommend the chapter by Martha Floyd Tenery, which she talks about visiting the home. And as she describes here, she herself she describes herself as an Anglo, blonde hair, an Anglo teacher, and going into something that is different for her, right? And so going outside your comfort zone, speaking a foreign language. She spoke Spanish, but it wasn't, of course, her first language at all. She had learned it, by teaching through interest and by teaching in these schools. Fearing the unknown all produce anxiety. This anxiety is similar to that which immigrant families encounter as they face unfamiliar people, customs, and activities. It is only by experiencing the same type of unease that someone from outside can understand the family's daily anxiety. So this for her, it's like, I understand now, or I feel like I understand better what some of these families are going through because I've also been put in this situation, even though, of course, we're talking different status of privilege and she's not naive in what she's writing, but I think it's still very powerful. And then the other chapter that I recommend in that book is the one by Kathy Amanti, another teacher at the time. Now she got a PhD, she's at Georgia, and I think I want to say she might be at Kennesaw, but I'm not entirely positive, or maybe Georgia State. But here says, what I do advocate is that teachers become acquainted with their students through an ethnographic, not just a teacher lens, in order to get beyond a superficial and stereotypical familiarity with them. This process gives the students and their families a sense that their experiences are academically valid. And that's what we try to do, the validity of the academic experiences. Then in the teacher study groups, as I said, we do the debriefing, we make connections to readings, and we develop classroom modules. A challenge for me and for several of us in the mathematics is how can we uncover the mathematics in context with which we may have no experience and may be very different from our background in academic mathematics. For example, if the family has a lot of experience in carpentry, will I be able to see the mathematics there? When maybe my mathematics is sadly, and you'll see a quote that makes me think of me, kind of limited because it's very academic, okay? So for example, in another piece, and here I'm just going to mention it, I talk about discussing the work of a seamstress. And we were analyzing the mathematics embedded in the practice of the seamstress. And the teacher asked, if you have too much school mathematics, does it erase our practical mathematics? And let's think about this, because if we're actually producing, letting, students finish school with, with their practical mathematics having been erased, I think we have a problem. And another teacher, herself, she was an experienced seamstress, but she didn't consider herself good at mathematics. And so she questioned, is it math or common sense? You do not have to do math, you just measure. So all of a sudden she's dismissing, right? What is math for her? Because she was a very good seamstress. So for her, as I said, the connection there. So then the classroom implementation, I'm going to briefly talk about two modules that I was involved in. One is the construction module in a second grade classroom. It was mostly done by Patricia Sandoval Taylor, and there is the chapter in the book. And this was she's one of the teachers who had looped the first graders into second grade, so she knew the families very well. This was a school in Tucson that has large community of Yoemi Yaqui, indigenous children, and Mexican American too. So the tension for me was pushing a mathematics agenda versus preserving what I call preserving the purity of forms of knowledge. For example, I wanted to do something around proportional reasoning, which is a bit of a stretch for second graders, but I had this idea that maybe we could do something, and the teacher was like, if it doesn't come out from them, no, we're not going to do it. So how do we negotiate the potential for mathematical content with the need to be responsive to the context or students' experiences? This idea of preserving the forms of knowledge. And the teacher says, I wanted the module to be inquiry-based, focus on my students' prior knowledge. And I also wanted the children to make the decisions and negotiate the curriculum. So again, if the experiences that they bring from the home do not involve proportional reasoning, let's say, then no, it's not going to happen. The other module was more carefully, developed in the sense, from my point of view. The first one, construction, was fantastically well developed by the teacher, but I didn't have that much involvement. In this one, I was a little more involved, and that was the garden module, and it's with 4th and 5th grades, and they wanted to do these gardens outside the classroom, and they were tended by the students, and resources and help from the parents. And as the nights turned cold, they needed to cover the gardens to protect them from frost. So basically, this is an idea, to give you an idea. So the gardens were not, the hard is too, the soil is too hard, so it was just in pots. And there's this chicken wire, and then you need a plastic to cover them. So there is a question of, how much plastic are we going to buy to cover these? And it's kind of like this area problem. But also, the students were reluctant to thin out their plants, so they needed more room, but the chicken wire was limited. It's not like you could just be making those, things bigger and bigger and bigger. So in a sense, it becomes this idea of maximizing area with fixed perimeter, right? Because you do have the chicken wire, and so it's a real problem, but in real life, how much math will we need to solve this situation? Because really, if you go back to the picture, well, you can probably, with a little bit of pushing, you can probably squeeze in another pot here and there, and you can pull whatever. So it's not necessarily that you have to go into the whole mathematical thing, but it gives us the hook for a classroom math task that was set in this realistic context, and that was the classroom task. Each student was given 3 feet of string to make a garden any shape they wanted, and then we asked them, how can you find the area of this? And there were several suggestions. So some were using their hands like to cover, some were using them more like a hand span, so that's more like a linear measurement. So it uncovers some possible confusion between linear and area units. There was also the issue of manipulatives using cubes. So when they're using cubes, they were thinking of 3D, and they didn't know how to handle the 3D instead of just thinking about the covering versus tiles. So this is a student using tiles. So again, it gives us that opportunity to engage the students in something that has a level of reality in that they had seen their gardens, and there is a little bit more of buy-in. I'm not saying it's perfect, but there was quite a bit of buy-in from the students, I think. So now moving forward, the household ethnographic visits, though they were very rich, they were not enough for some of us. A colleague of mine and myself, we were like, you know, they help us in the recognition of knowledge and resources among groups of people who have often been marginalized, okay? But we felt that to a certain extent, the exchange was not on equal terms. Teachers and researchers were learning from the parents. But as we interacted with a group of women, mothers at a local school in a reading, they were doing some a reading group in Spanish, they were reading books in Spanish. We realized that they also wanted to learn mathematics. They found out that I was doing mathematics, and so there was this interest in the mothers learning from us, and we were not offering that, right? We were going into the home, the teachers were going into the home. I went into the home with some of the teachers, but it was mostly the teachers, and we were learning from them, but what were we giving them in exchange, right? So this led to develop the development of mathematics workshop for parents. And this is where we added this idea of parents as intellectual resources. So now we have the ethnographic household visit, the teacher study groups, the classroom implementation, but also this notion of parents as intellectual resources, which is the idea that we value that, you know, that they know and the experiences they bring. It is based on a two-way dialogue, parents, researchers, while on one hand we were facilitating workshops for the parents because they wanted that, but we were also learning from them. So it wasn't us teaching. Quite often when I do this work with parents, I get the question about, oh, so this is so that the parents can help their kids with homework. And yeah, that's their motivation, to be honest, when they join. But we try to move away from that and also open up more like the dialogue and say, no, you also do a lot of mathematics and know a lot of mathematics, and we want to learn from you. So it's more this two-way. So here I'm going to give you a sample of ideas, activities that we've done to learn from and with parents. I won't go into all of these, but if anyone is interested, I mean, I can certainly, I mean, I've written about it, but I can also spend more time, you know, talking about them. So one of them is the workshops where parents explore mathematics. And these are usually self-contained, it's a workshop. And quite often, I'll come back to that, these workshops, and this is the novel idea here, is that they're facilitated by parents, co-facilitated by parents and teachers. So not necessarily facilitated by us, researchers, or by teachers, but parents are also facilitating those workshops. And that is, I think, a very interesting idea for this work. Then there's the mini courses, the math for parents. So these are longer. These are usually 8 sessions on fractions, on algebra. We do other things, but these are the topics, right? And this is for the parents, math for parents. Then, as I said, the workshops led by parents and teachers. This relates to the first one, but I wanted to emphasize that these are led by the parents, for parents. Then we have this idea of tertulia mathematica. So like get together, tertulia, like it comes from, for me, comes from the literary circle where you would go to a cafe and you would discuss a book. Well, we get together and we learn from each other and we explore issues that relate to the children's mathematics education. We do math together, but we also take a more critical approach. And we try to really engage in critical mathematics education conversations. Another very powerful approach is classroom visit with parents. Take parents, have them visit a math classroom, and then let's talk about it. And I'm going to show you an example in a second. And then occupational interviews. These are interviews that we did with the seamstress, as I mentioned, with the welder, with the carpenter, and it's to try to uncover the mathematics that they may be doing. So it's more of an ethnomathematics lens. From all of these, there are several research topics, and I'm only going to talk about the first 3. If people are interested in the other 2, again, I've written about it and we can talk about, but I'm going to focus on parents as adult learners of mathematics, parents' perceptions about the teaching and learning of mathematics, and parents and the valorization of knowledge. So the parents as adult learners, I'm going to give an example, understanding graphs. So we were using the mathematics curriculum at the middle school at the basis for the courses. This is in the math for parent courses, in that idea of a course. And the facilitator had presented a graph and co-constructed a story to go with it. Facilitator, I think his graph, something about the amount of gas in the car and how it changes, over the week. And the task was for the groups to come up with their graphs and stories. So this is important because then the participants get to choose the topic and how they represent it. It gives us a window about what matters to them, what they want to share. Because now we don't give them any more. I mean, yes, we give them a sample, and so it's possible that some of them may follow that sample. But one of the mothers, Luisa, and her group of mothers, they were all women. In that particular Math for Parents, there were a couple of men, but this particular group is Luisa and her group. They were all women. They come up with a graph that represents their level of energy as the week goes on. And I'm going to show you the only video clip that you're going to see, and partially it's because of the Zoom and the recording. I'm limited in, so it's in Spanish, but it has subtitles. It's just very brief. So this is Luisa explaining this graph that is the level of energy.
Que amanecemos con menos, hay veces que subimos, vamos subiendo y bajando. Puede amanecer uno con menos energías, el viernes con menos, el sábado va bajando la energía y el domingo pues estamos agotados.
And so it gives you an idea, right, about it's the reality. I mean, and by the end of the week, we are like exhausted, right? So it adds some humor, but it's real, it's reality also. And that's why I wanted to share with you. Oops. And this is the same thing, but just in case the video didn't work. So it's, the level of energy, and as you just heard the video, but we wake up, sometimes with a lot of energy, then it goes down, then on Thursday, then, and on Monday we start all over again. That is how I understand it, okay. A more recent example is this. This was different. We gave him this graph that is adapted from work done by, at Mars, with Fraunhofer and others, but it's just a graph. I mean, we took out and they were supposed to come up with stories for this graph. And first, this group of mothers, this is more recent work, they developed a whole story on cooking rice. So it was just kind of funny to, because they were working together and they were making sense of it. And here the flame goes up or down or whatever, and it boils and it doesn't boil. But they also discussed that different ways of cooking rice. And the grad student at the time, this is Fanny Salazar's master thesis, at the time, some of this off-task talk was puzzling to her. But, it's not off-task. I mean, they are engaging with the activity, but they are taking it so seriously that this becomes, they share ideas about how they cook rice. So that was the first. And then each person got to use the same graph and write their own story. And at some point, if you're interested, I'll share the paper with you. It's a paper that we have for ICME, but that we presented, and then we're working now on a chapter. But one of the stories talked about a seed, the plant from seed to flower. And another mother talked about going to church and changes in her peaceful level. And so she was talking here, and all the mothers were helping her because they said, well, what happens in 5? And she says, well, 5, I think, I may not get it right now, but 5 is when she's church and is the highest level of peacefulness. It's like she's really rich. And then she gets out of church and it's the kids, the breakfast, the whatever, and the peacefulness goes down. And it's funny because they weren't coming up with the right, and so the other mothers got involved and they were helping her to construct the story. And that's what I want to emphasize, that it doesn't become an individual. They are all interested in each other's stories and they all help each other make sense of the story. Okay, so that's. So overall, our experiences show that parents enjoy coming back to learn or relearn mathematics. For some, they feel it's a second chance at doing what they were not able to do as children. It is also an opportunity to engage with other adults, like in the group of these mothers helping each other, or the other graph with Luisa, or with their children, because sometimes we do have children in these workshops, in a conversation about mathematics, something they may not have had a chance to do before. At the center of all of this is the concept of confianza that is critical when we're working with any community, but particularly with Latinx families or Latina families, is this idea of reciprocity, mutual trust. Anyone who's doing work with Latinx family has probably read about and seen the word confianza before, so I wanted to bring it up here because this is crucial for us. Parents' perceptions, that was the second topic. And when I say parents, I'm talking about immigrant parents. So this is very general. parents in general, and again, immigrant parents, they're quite open about the differences they notice. And things are along the lines of the level. They tend to think that it was higher there, meaning Mexico in this case, than here, higher level. The approaches, they're not required to memorize the multiplication facts here. In Mexico, they should already know the multiplication facts by 2nd grade. Resources, here they give them everything. They give them paper, they give them pencils. In Mexico, you had to bring your supplies. And then the practices, in Mexico, they use a notebook. And in fact, if you have, I visited a school in Mexico, there's a notebook, they take notes, it's very organized. And here, some schools do, some schools don't, lose sheets of paper, there is not, and again, I'm projecting here what the parents have experienced. I have to say that many of these perceptions are shared among immigrant parents across the world. So in this review of the literature that I did in that chapter, I looked a little bit of literature on Turkish parents in Germany and Pakistani and other immigrant parents in the UK, and there are similarities, particularly in terms of the level and the approaches. I don't know so much about the resources and the practices. So the next slide is two excerpts, two parents in the same group, father and a mother, not related, and they're talking about what they would like. So Marcos says, to give them homework, so they bring it home, so we can see what kinds of mathematics they are doing. Because there are many children who don't bring any. My daughter doesn't bring any. They don't give her any. And Mila, the mother of another middle school in that same school, besides giving them homework, they need to demand more. Because what I see with my daughter in a school here and a school in Mexico, they should demand more. Because for her, it's very easy here, and she just kind of glosses over. And in addition to more demanding, the school should be stricter with them. They are too lax. Because now we're talking about middle school. And yes, in this middle school, there was uniform, but the uniform was perhaps not as strict as maybe it was in Mexico. And I'm not saying that they're talking about uniform only, but that was part of the discussion. The homework, like this Marcus was saying, yeah, when I was in the school, if you didn't bring the homework, they send you home. Well, we wouldn't be doing that, right? Could you imagine? If you bring the homework, you send them home. We would, So there's all these differences, and this creates a complex situation. Because on one hand, Mexican immigrant parents value education, like all parents, and they're sometimes puzzled by what they see as lack of rigor, little homework, and low level in what their children are learning. And again, these are the perceptions. But still, many of them are quite satisfied with the schooling in the US because the amount of resources, caring teachers, learning English, and more options, like, they have art, they have computer classes. So there is this complexity, right? They don't have to pay. They don't have to pay for supplies. There is an economic, clearly an economic advantage also. Now, I really want to stress the power of classroom visits. That to me was eye-opening. So it's a great context to learn about each other's perceptions about teaching and learning mathematics. A group of mothers, most of whom had attended a school in Mexico, visited a middle school math class. Now, it's hard if you haven't been educated in a country other than, in this case, the US, or if you haven't visited the schools outside the US, you might not be aware of the classroom routines that we take for granted, okay? And so it's very interesting to see what caught their attention in the debriefing. So here is the first thing that one of the mothers said. The tables were not like this, arranged in groups. We would sit normal. Okay. Again, because we all bring our valorization of knowledge. So you enter in this middle school, there are whiteboards all over the place, they are in groups. In rows and facing the board, she elaborates, okay? There were many things written on the board. In our case, they will only write what they were going to teach that day. Well, what happens is that you are entering the math class. There are things already written. That is not the case in many other countries. Like, this was not my experience, because what happens in Mexico and what happens in Spain, which is where I went, the children don't leave the classroom. The teacher is the one who moves. And this is an eye-opener for teachers here who are not aware of this, and for parents. These mothers had been in the States for quite a while. And it was this realization of like, now I get it, why my kids sometimes get tardy or whatever, because the kids are the ones for moving and the teacher is in the class, right? You are the math teacher and you are in your room. That's not our experience. We stay and the teachers move. So that's a very different, it creates a very different dynamic, because that means that the teachers then have a place, like a teacher's room, where they get together and they can share ideas, versus one of the critiques of the US system is that the teachers are very isolated. You stay in your room, you might not talk to anyone else. I mean, you know, you have a planning period, but it's a bit different. So it's an interesting notion. There is more distraction being in a group. Now we go back to this idea of the group. And then the last one, sitting individually, they learn better. They were concerned about copying, that, you know, they could copy from each other. So. Okay, and the last topic is the parents and valorization of knowledge. So as I said, we all bring our beliefs, and this is very common. This is a very common topic of discussion, the differences in the typical division algorithm in Mexico and in the US. If you don't know what it is, this is what it looks like. So in Mexico, like in Spain, in Colombia, and in many other countries, we don't write the subtraction. We do it in our head. So you write directly the result, and you know, and in the US, well, you know what you do. And I'm talking about the standard, whatever you want to call a standard, the traditional, the algorithm that many of you learn. I actually learned the Mexican way, but on reverse mirror image. So, but I won't go there. So this is a mother's reaction to the US method. And when I looked at how he, the son, was dividing, he subtracted, and that he wrote all the equation complete, I said, this teacher wants to make things complicated. No, son, not that way, this way. And he learned faster with this procedure, the Mexican way. I mean, I'm putting that, you know, like to compare. So basically the mother is like, no, no, no. And then Veronica says in the same setting, I tried to do the same with my child with divisions, that he didn't write everything, but he says, no, no, mom, the teacher is going to think that I did it on the computer. You don't need to write the subtraction, son. I say, you only put what is left. No, no, my teacher is going to think that I did it on the computer. I have to do it like that. Okay, you think that, but I want to teach you how we learn. And I did teach him, but he still uses his method, and that way he feels safe that he's doing his homework as they told him to. And sure enough, when I've shown this, and I've done this with pre-service teachers and practicing teachers, they say, but if they don't show it, and if they make a mistake, and how are we going to know? And you know, I don't want to be, you know, but I always say, well, I don't understand, but many of us learned this other way, and that was not an issue for our teachers. So why is this an issue for you? I mean, okay, I don't, but you know, it's again, it's what we challenge. It's what, you know, why do we get so attached to our ways? You know, what happens though is that then children are caught in the middle between the school's way and the parents' way. And I argue that this may be more problematic for immigrant children since they're navigating at least two cultures and are trying to fit into this new culture, and depending on where you're immigrating for, there's all the pressure, the power differential. And so this is from a mother. Last night, my son said to me that school from Mexico was not valued the same as a school here. That is, it doesn't count. What I studied there doesn't count here. He knows that what is taught here is different from what is taught there. And so he says, why would I ask my mom for help if she's not going to know? So there is a barrier. And though I know that for those of you who have kids, you go through this even without being immigrants, or, you know, I still argue that there is a level of emotional, you know, charge when we're talking when we're doing this in immigration context. As Marisol said, the teachers want to do a better job with the kids that come from Mexico or from other places, but they don't start thinking that it's not just the kids, it's the parents, and they go together. That's something for us to keep in mind, right? I mean, you see the kids, but they don't come in isolation, they come with the parents. Children bring to school their home experiences, and if those are not recognized, what may be the consequences? What message do we give when we say, yes, but that's in mama's home? That's a teacher who said that, you know, about a procedure. Let's do it the way that we do it in school. So we are separating, right, both context. So let's summarize, and then I'm going to move to the last part of. So in the funds of knowledge, the teachers learn from parents through home visits, right? In the tertulias mathematicas, the researchers and the parents engage in dialogue. We discuss the different ways to divide. We learn from them. The researchers learn from and about parents' everyday use of mathematics, and we also explore school mathematics. The idea of parents and teachers co-facilitating math workshops, that as I said was very powerful, but there is a potential power issues, right? Because do the teachers take cover? Do they work, with the parents? Do the parents, feel like they are in an equal plane? What is missing, and this is the new project or the more recent work, is the parents and teachers working together. I mean, there was a little bit of that when they were co-facilitating workshops, but as I said, there were power issues there. So in this more recent work, I've been trying to refine that more, and how can we address that? So now we're focusing more on parents and teachers learning from each other, and I'm going to draw on two projects, Hablemos, Let's Talk, which was funded by the Isaac Sanders Foundation, and the Juntos Together, which is the most recent project funded by NSF. The tertulias now bring together teachers and parents, and of course, university researchers. I'm going to focus on two activities that we've been using. One activity is this Funds of Knowledge conversation, parents and teachers. So we have a tool in which we pair up a parent and a teacher, or sometimes two parents and one teacher, because we may have more parents in the room than teachers, depending on the setup. And basically, they engage in a Funds of Knowledge conversation. So instead of doing a home visit, I mean, the teachers may also do a home visit, but these are participants in the project. So instead of the teacher going to the home and finding out about, the Funds of Knowledge, now the parent is also finding out about the Funds of Knowledge of the teacher. So they are finding out about what you do in your free time, or do you have any hobbies, or do you speak any other languages, or whatever, how do you use mathematics in your everyday life? And so there are a set of questions. And what happens then is, as the result of doing this activity, this is a very long quote, but it's from a teacher in the first project, and they realize that we have much in common. So this teacher says, I think it's kind of crazy how much we have in common, the teachers and the parents. And don't think about it, because you see someone in a teacher role, and I think you have an idea of how that teacher is going to act and how they are. And then you see someone in a parent role, and you just expect that they act and are in a certain way. But then to find out so much of their upbringing was pretty similar. And it really comes down to a lot of us are similar, and we shouldn't be afraid of nervous to talk to one another, because I think we're all trying to help out, but people get intimidated sometimes. Okay, so it's this idea of we are more similar. And then this is what happens during the dialogue. So Magali, one of the mothers, I did not learn math very well. I don't remember them explaining. So if I did not get the explanation, I was lost. Maybe by fourth grade, I stayed lost. And the teacher shares, yeah, I never did really well on math when I was a kid. So then there is this connection, actually, yeah, my experience wasn't that great either. I mean, I'm not saying, it could be a good experience, but in this case, they're sharing that neither of them had a very good experience. Or here, Amanda, the teacher. I remember that we had books, the teachers would write problems on the blackboard, and we had to copy them. I don't remember using any manipulatives. Soledad, the mother. Me neither. I don't remember using many manipulatives. I use my fingers and my mind. So again, it creates a point of commonality. Okay? So that's one thing. And the other activity is doing mathematics together. So first I'll share a quote, and then I'll explain about what do we mean by doing math together, because it's not just any math. I mean, one has to be strategic. But this is a quote from a mother. When it came time to doing the math activity, the mothers that I was next to were eager to start. It reminded me of how a classroom should be, an environment where everyone feels safe and can take risks without feeling embarrassed about getting the wrong answer or of being afraid of showing their own strategies. This is so powerful. I know that every time I have gone to one of the math workshops, I myself have learned new strategies from the parents. And I'm so grateful that they themselves feel comfortable enough to share. Okay, so that's what we're aiming for. Now, what does it mean doing math together? The choice of the task is key. It has to be open-ended, kind of a modeling flavor. We don't think it should be a typical school task. We're right now analyzing data in which we had a fraction task, and it was more of a typical task, ordering fractions. And as I say, all I remember now is from being there. We haven't analyzed the data, but the teachers were taking over. They're not supposed to touch each other's cards because it was like a complex instruction type activity. But the teacher is basically saying, no, move this one, versus a task that is more of an equalizer, like, the making paper flowers that I describe, or the sharing popcorn, because everybody has experience with sharing, so they can bring different experiences, something on tamales. And the most recent one that we are analyzing, I'm just going to share the task, we don't have any, is this one, the sugar skulls. So this, what it was, is we showed them this picture on the right, and we gave them this recipe. And the recipe only talks about, 4 medium or 6 small sugar skulls. But if you notice in the picture, they are small, they're medium, they are large. So the recipe and the picture don't necessarily match. It was all intentional, right? It was like, let's leave it open. Boy, did that create discomfort with the teachers and the parents, because they were like, but how are we expecting to know this? How are we going, what are you asking? And we have a picture of, I don't know if it's 2 teachers and 1 mother, or 2 mothers and 1 teacher, and they are coming to the computer like I'm here and really trying to count how many, and, so you can see that there is this, it's such a different task, but again, that's what kinds of tasks that we're looking for. So when we bring parents and teachers together, we're noticing many similarities. They learn about each other's experiences with mathematics. They're seeing parents as doers of mathematics, so it challenges the deficit views. For example, one of the teachers very recently, like just 2 weeks ago, she said, I got to know the mother of my student better, and I was surprised that she knew quite a bit. Because quite often we don't know that the mothers don't know the teachers, and the teachers don't know the mothers. Of course, very important, they develop relationships. Particularly for teachers who do not speak Spanish, it helped address the barrier they felt. So this is from a teacher who doesn't speak Spanish, and she said, it's hard for me because I don't speak Spanish. So it's a nice opportunity to see what other parents are thinking who speak Spanish. I feel like I'm closer to them now. Like they'll say hi in the hallway. Something as simple as that, but it caught her attention. That's an amazing opportunity to get to know everyone. Since I don't speak Spanish, I feel more comfortable. All right, so implications then to wrap it up. So I think that we, teachers, administrators, researchers, teacher educators, we need to recognize parents as intellectual resources who play a key role in their children's education. This is particularly important when parents come from marginalized communities whose knowledge and experiences may have been disregarded by schools. We need to engage teachers and pre-service teachers in authentic learning experiences with parents. And I've given some examples, and I'm sure there are others, and I'll be very happy to hear about other things that you've done or that you know of. And as I said, we have developed tools and approaches to help develop stronger relationships school-home. Some issues for consideration: tension. The teachers want to engage in this work, but they feel the pressure of the school. The pacing calendar, the what mathematics to teach, so they feel like they're caught in between. How to develop mathematics teaching innovations that keep the integrity of the context and of the mathematics, going back to the preserving the purity of furnace of knowledge. Will students and the parents view these mathematics activities as real mathematics? Or will they think that we're doing some experimentation, And how to engage parents and teachers together to address power issues. So we started the talk with what led me to this work, and then I guess, what do I still do this work? And I'm going to share a quote that I've shared in other talks, but it's still very real to me, and I became aware of it many years ago through my colleague Norma Gonzalez, but it wasn't until much later that I really, it percolated, and to me it makes a lot of sense. So this is a quote that some of you may have seen, but I wanted to finish from Adrienne Rich. When those who have power to name and to socially construct reality choose not to see you or hear you, whether you are dark-skinned, old, disabled, female, or speak with a different accent or dialect than theirs, when someone with the authority of a teacher, say, describes the world and you are not in it, there is a moment of psychic disequilibrium, as if you looked into a mirror and saw nothing. And for me, this quote is why I do this work. I want the communities that I work with not to be in this situation of psychic disequilibrium where they look into the mirror and they don't see, themselves, or they see nothing. So, on this note, thank you.
questions. We have a lot more people online. We'll try alternating, although. Says, I'm thankful to Martha for her selfless impact on my life in the United States. Martha, strike the difference between tons of knowledge and ethnomathematics from the Mexican.
What was the question? I thought she was making an assertion. Emmanuel, stay out of this one. I know Emmanuel.
So the question is,
Oh, the difference.
the differences
No, no.
and ethnomathematics.
Well, I would say that funds of knowledge gives you a process to get into the ethnomathematics. I don't consider myself an expert on ethnomathematics. The closer would be the occupational interviews, where you are really focusing on how do they use mathematics in the practice. While the funds of knowledge is broader, it's more about values, how they, expectations, hopes for their children, education, beliefs about education, about language. So it's a bit more, it's a broader view of the whole child versus the specificity of how they use mathematics in something. So I don't know if that answers your question, Emmanuel. Probably not, because knowing you're probably going to come up with another question. But sorry, but I happen to know Emmanuel, so. Sure.
With the teachers, students, and parents. To what extent did you notice maybe parents being more engaged, or do you have like just any data? Because a lot of times we hear that there's a disconnect between parents not going like to parent conferences or not being involved in a round, and it seemed like a way to also get buy-in and to like kind of burn some of those, or I guess create bridges between parents and teachers. So in your work, how have you noticed that?
Yeah, so there is the good part and the not so good part. The not so good part I'll start with is that quite often in this work, we work with very small groups of parents, and it's very hard to reach out to the parents who are not already somewhat around. So what we do in the Math for Parents and in the workshops, with mixed success, I'll say, is we have a core group of mothers, usually it's mothers, women, not necessarily, we've had some fathers, but usually, and they're already more or less involved in the school, more or less, which then of course is a biased sample, right? But then we tell them, please, invite your neighbors, invite whatever, and so with mixed success, some of the parents might come. If they come, quite often they do stay. Okay, so they see value in being there, but they first have to come. Now, on the other hand, the other part of your question is we also then need to understand what we need or change our views of what do we mean by parental engagement. Because it is true that quite often you'll hear teachers saying, well, they don't come to the parent-teachers conference, or I've been trying to reach out, but they are doing many other things that show their interest and their support for the children's education, and quite often we don't know. So what I'm hoping is that through the force of knowledge and through knowing more about what families do, we can inform teachers and school administrators about other forms of involvement that do not require the physical presence of the parent in the school, because it might not work for scheduling reasons. It might not work because it might not be a welcoming place, to be honest, I'm not talking just language, it might bring memories. Now, with COVID and the whole online, this has also brought a different, something that we need to look more into it, right? Because all of a sudden, the parents were in the teachers in the classroom because they were right there because they were supporting their kids. So that's a different, that's really worth exploring. But as I said, there are two sides to that question. I really appreciate that because I want to make sure that we we also challenge the definitions of parental involvement and what does it mean for a parent to be involved, because quite often we're using more of a white European middle class approach to what it means to be involved. So, yeah. Yeah, so for example, quite often the parents that we talk to, they make, okay, so I'm going to give an example. This was during COVID, but it's not. This mother was sharing with us that she prepared the workspace for the child. She put aromatizer, soothing, whatever, to make sure that the child would be comfortable. I mean, things that when she was sharing that, I don't know, I don't think we would have thought of that. So she was trying to do, they make sure, of course, that they have a good meal, that, she says, I make sure that I give them a hug, that there is a whole affective, whatever, I might be there, I might not be able to help them, but I'm there for them. So there is all this affective and creating a space and basically support and affective and that we might not see, because they are not necessarily coming to the parent-teacher. I'm not saying, I mean, this mother happened to be going to a parent-teacher also, so that's not, but, and they start sharing that, and you realize that there's so many other ways, or they start sharing, oh yeah, we take the kids to, for example, here is another example. A teacher did a home visit, and she said that home visit was really eye-opening for her, because she had chosen this family because there was this summer program or these activities after school, and the kids were not involved, and she wanted to know, how come we have this wonderful activity, and how come these kids don't want to participate? And what she found out is that the parents took the kids to some, I don't know if they were doing some painting or something, not because they needed the kids' help, because they said, this is a time that we spend together as a family. So for them, it was more important to be spending time with their kids in the after-school time as a family than to put the kids yet in an after-school program away from them. So again, what do you value? Quite often in some mentalities, it's like, put the kids in after-school, in extracurricular, I mean, whatever. Well, for this family, the time together was more important. And so when she heard that, I mean, this teacher was blown away. She says, oh my gosh, here I was misjudging them and saying, oh, they're missing out on this opportunity, when really what they're doing is providing an effective environment that is much more important, for them. So that would be another example, yeah. Have something from online? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I should have, but we were talking about this the other day with a colleague of mine, that when you are in this setting, I'm supposed to be repeating the question.
It's a forced revoicing or something.
Yeah.
So I had a question, thinking about many of the folks who are teaching secondary and then post-secondary mathematics. And your example of the maximizing the area and minimizing the perimeter, or holding the perimeter constant, of course, made me think of a calculus problem. And a more kind of serious question, I guess, is what, and maybe this is a speculative question, so feel free to say I'm not going to answer, but what would this approach look like, thinking about instructors of either upper secondary or secondary and university level math classes? And I don't know if it'd be family involvement or if it would be some other form of involvement, a different community of involvement. But I'm curious to hear more about your thoughts on implications of this work at various kind of developmental levels for learners.
Yeah, so a lot of my work has been certainly at the kinder through 8th grade, not even much beyond, But at the university level now, I'm working with my colleague, Ari Regia, and we have a grant which is basically based on his work. But we are working with instructors and discussing this idea of anti-deficit teaching. And with the students, with the undergrads, which are mostly pre-calculus and calculus students, students of color, The idea is to make some connection, except that with the pandemic, that didn't work out so well, but with the cultural centers, so the centers, that we have on campus for the Latinx students and for the Black students, indigenous students. And that's kind of like the community. So that would be the notion of community, because we're not going to be going and visiting their families. I mean, that's not, but the idea is to also uncover or learn from the students themselves funds of knowledge, which is something that some people have been doing. I haven't been doing it that much, but I think that at the undergrad level, that would be more appropriate to try to, now in terms of mathematics and in terms of changing the content, I don't know, that's more of again, Ari has done a little bit more with linear algebra, and he has an article on that if you're interested, where he's looking at the concept of basis from a point of view of everyday experiences with the students. Yes, it's a very unique, in my opinion, but I'm not an expert, so I wouldn't be able to. So for us, it's more for the instructors to, again, see more the students as sense makers. As it goes back to the parental involvement question in a sense, right? I mean, sometimes we might think, oh, this student is, in college algebra or in pre-calculus, and they should already know that, and they're not doing whatever, and trying to change that mindset about, wait a minute, what is it that they know? They know a lot, and it's not, it's kind of like the typical thing that you hear now, that it's not that the students have to be prepared for college, we need to be prepared for them, So it's that two-way dialogue. So I think that in there are things that can be done. In this new project that we were trying to do, and originally, I know that in the abstract, but I realized I didn't have enough data to really share anything, very substantial, other than the framework I think is applicable, yeah. Yes. I have to take the microphone or something, so yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. And I think as a teacher educator, a lot of the ways in which I think about funds of knowledge are how it applies to language and literacy. And so hearing you speak about math is really helping me broaden my understanding of how it can get taken up in teacher education, especially thinking about how in many ways, the ways in which we teach in schools, language and literacy is, if you don't use what's valued in school, then there's this mismatch, and there's the proper comes in, right? Like you were talking about earlier. I think for me, the proper way to do math is something I haven't been thinking about, right? But how that message can get unintentionally sent home by well-meaning teachers, right? Without doing this kind of critical work. So I'm having lots of ahas and still going to be pondering it. My question for you is a little bit different though. So we're teacher educators, but we also are preparing future educational researchers. And as we continue to do this work, I haven't really thought much about how funds of knowledge can influence epistemology, for example, or some of the ways in which future PhDs can really think deeply about the types of questions that they're asking before they get into the field in working with particularly minoritized communities. What are your thoughts on that, and have you been using funds of knowledge strategically or intentionally to prepare doctoral students?
Yeah. So kind of like going to, when I first started the talk and says, what led you to this work? When I talk to doctoral students, I always tell them that you have to follow your passion. So if you're not passionate, if you are getting a degree, because you want, that's the wrong reason. It has to be something that you're passionate about, okay? It might take you longer if you are, depending on what it is, but if you're passionate, I think it will pay, it will be much more worthwhile. And so as part of this passion, for me, the work is with the community. That's where I get the most out of it. So for me, the pandemic was hard for everybody, but for those of us who do work in the community, it was particularly, because we couldn't get in the community, And I know you couldn't get into the schools, but even when you could get into the schools, it wasn't so easy to get into the community because the families, were not necessarily allowed yet to come into the, do these things that are still somewhat limited. So all the work that I do, the grad students that I working with me, they all know that my orientation is this more sociocultural approach based on learning from the community by hanging out in the community. So for example, a clear example of this is a student that I now have. She finished her master, now she's a PhD student, you know. I mean, I see her, she's an amazing individual. She's from Mexico, so of course for her, this has a personal significance also. But there is this connection and this, I think that at the beginning, I don't think she was so aware necessarily of the deficit discourse or the deficit, you know, not that she had, but that existed. And now it's like, she picks up on it right away and she challenges, and that's really what I want. I want people to become advocates and to speak up. On the other hand, I also want them to get their PhDs. So when we had their Center for Mathematics Education of Latinos, some of the grad students who are now good colleagues of mine were pretty much like an activist, and they wanted to do more and more. And I remember telling them, this is great, but get your PhD first, and then go ahead and do your activism. I mean, I'm not saying that you cannot do both, okay, don't get me wrong, but you know what I'm talking about, right? That there is a fine line between just doing the work of getting the PhD and perhaps just because you want a degree, or going to the other extreme, getting so much into the community and all that, and then the not so exciting part of getting the PhD, which, you know, there are parts that are not that exciting, let's be honest, goes by the side. And so trying to find this balance is very important as a faculty member for the students, because I want them to ultimately bring change to their communities. You know, I mean, not to the communities, not change the communities, you know, bring change to how the communities are perceived, you know, in teacher education or whatever it is that they do, yeah. Sorry, yeah, you have a question, right? Oh, you have a question from...
Okay, I guess I don't have to move. I can use the microphone here. All right, this is from Esperanza, and she says, thanks so much for your experience. You mentioned that we need to let go of the idea of middle-class parent involvement and learn what it looks like for parents from underrepresented communities, i.e. Latino parents who work 2 jobs. Can you talk more about how you've seen what that looks like, so that it takes into account the reality of the parent and are able to feel empowered and included in the education of their education? Maybe their students, I'm not sure. It says education of education. Additionally, you mentioned the impact of home visits and how they're labor intensive. What suggestions do you have for teachers who haven't done any home visits at all and need to take that initial step in learning to do them somehow systematically as part of their teaching routine and not just a one-time thing? I also know sometimes the language barrier is there.
Okay, I'm going to take the home visit one first, because that's very, I mean, they're all important, but the home visit, this is a bit tricky. I've done what I call light versions of home visits, okay, where they don't do all the ethnographic training that my colleague did. They read those chapters that I mentioned, we do the rehearsal, and they go. And that's, for example, with that light version, was very powerful in the case of the teacher that I was sharing, where she saw how these parents value more spending time with their children. And that goes a little bit related to the first question and what Charles, right? Yeah, asked about the parental engagement. So they value more spending time with the children than sending their children to the after-school project. However, a light version of home visit also runs the risk of essentializing, right? Because you might go into the home, not see much, whatever that is, and conclude, therefore, that there isn't much. So it is a very risky undertaking. I don't know what kind of advice I could give, but I mean, I think that I would like to suggest to Esperanza that she may want to email me directly. And I think my email was in the first slide, right? Okay. Oh, Esperanza somewhere that is here? Oh, okay, I didn't realize she was a student here. I thought, okay, well, then Esperanza can ask me, sorry. I thought it was, like Emmanuel is somewhere else and, got it. Well, so then we can talk about that first, because that first question relates a little bit to what I already addressed earlier. So I'll talk to Esperanza and tomorrow, it looks like it. Okay. And you had a question, so no, so, yeah.
It was more a response to your question that in my first doctoral class here at SDSU, I took Bill, and we had a reading about funds of knowledge, and I think it did really affect my epistemology and sort of how I think about math education and mathematics and conduct research. So I think even like including it in a introductory course was really impactful.
Thank you. Since I don't see the people on Zoom, now is where I feel like, who is on Zoom?
Okay, do we have any other questions? I don't have any others on Zoom.
All right, go for it. You're getting your steps today.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
I have a question. So I teach the bilingual math and science methods courses here, and my students are in the Zoom room, hopefully still right now. I'm watching you, just kidding. My question is, in one of our classes, and I was talking to my colleagues who also teach math methods for elementary teachers, and we were having a conversation about how do we make word problems culturally relevant, because we talk about it, but how do we push our students, or how do we guide them to go beyond, well, if I have a Latino student, we're gonna count how many tacos you can eat, or, do you know where I'm getting at? So that's a conversation that we were having about 2 weeks ago. So I think this is a great opportunity to bring this up and how you would do that, or how you would guide those conversations. Thank you.
Yeah, so the funds of knowledge allowed us to create situations that really grew out of what we know from the community now. Obviously, in a very, very diverse classroom, and if you can only visit 2 or 3 students, then you might not be able to get to all the different experiences that your students have. Tucson is diverse, but probably not as diverse as other settings, right? So for us, for example, one of the activities that a teacher developed, I was not involved in that, but that led to a series of math problems and other things, interesting, had to do with comparing candy, the candy that you buy or that you find here in the US versus candy made in Mexico. And there was this mother who knew a lot about that, and she came and made candy from scratch with the kids in the class. And so from there, you can imagine, obviously science problems, but also math problems. And it's not so much that they are, as you said, put into the context of tacos or tortillas or whatever. They are put into a context that happens to be Mexican candy and non-Mexican candy, but it's something that the kids are familiar with because it's a candy that they know. So it's a simple example, but the point I'm trying to make is that it's not so much the context of the problem, but that the context is relevant to the children. So for me, so for example, this is totally out there, but the teachers most recently that I was talking to in the project that I have, they were talking about Pokemon cards, because I guess Pokemon are still very relevant to kids in that age. I don't know, but the teachers are aware of that. Now, Pokemon has nothing to do with, it's more the culture of the child, if you want, or they did something for around Halloween with pumpkins, or the example that I show of the skulls, with the sugar skulls, because it's Dia de los Muertos, that's very important, but we're not trying to essentialize, we're going to do something with Dia de los Muertos. So we take a context that we know that it brings some familiarity. And then we go with that, or we learn from the kids, what are you interested in? The 8th grade teacher who developed the whole project about build your dream home, that came from interviewing parents, knowing that many of the parents of the children were in construction, the fathers. And then he developed a wonderful unit on very sophisticated mathematics, with a lot of, really a lot of math in that. And it was the kids got to develop their dream home. And so that's, again, is an example. And then you get to invite perhaps some of the parents who come and they can share about their expertise on construction. And so all of a sudden you're validating the knowledge of a parent that you may not have thought, not you personally, but you may not have thought of bringing into the classroom to talk about. Like my colleague Rosie Andrade told me, she was the first person I worked with on funds of knowledge when we started. She grew up in Tucson, and she said that she went to a school that the parents who came to talk to the school were the lawyers or the doctors or the working class parents whose kids were also attending that school. So again, it's starting to change whose knowledge do we value, and
I have a message for Dr. Navarro that her students are still on.
I have to say the chat lit up as soon as you started speaking, just so you know. Well, I just want to close tonight, or this afternoon, and thank Dr. Sevilla one last time for a wonderful talk.
My pleasure.
And we'll be around to chat for a few minutes. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to everyone who is online. And let's hope the conversations continue. So thank you very much for coming this evening.
Thank you. Pleasure.